Mr. Rahul Singh, welcome to the store. So good to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Right, let's begin right away with the beer market in India, tagged at about 5,500 million liters consumption in 2020 and expected to touch about 9,000 million liters in 2025. Now, that number looks pretty good on the surface, but the per capita consumption of beer in India is still quite low. And in addition, there are several government regulations as well as high taxation in many states. Do you think these things are inhibiting the growth of the category? Otherwise, it would have been much larger. And which areas do you think need the most attention if one were to push consumption of beer in India?
Yes. So first of all, I think India is underserved when it comes to beer. So from a macro level, yes, we are underserved. India, from a per capita point of view, we're drinking 2 liters per capita, which comes to the number that you've suggested. But this can go up. So from a perspective where China was, I just compare with China in our own way because our demographics are similar. China was also at 2 liters per capita. Today is 25 liters per capita. So I think there is a lot of headroom, and that headroom can come in through not just from a consumer's perspective, but also from government policies. But where it comes in is the government looks at beer as a liquor, and that's where actually the trouble starts. So for them, liquor is meaning beer is just another liquor. And when it comes to liquor in India, as you know, alcohol or liquor for human consumption is a state subject. So each state has to take out revenues and excise the revenue department. And you know that states really make a lot of revenues out of the liquor excise duties and VATs and taxations. So from their perspective, for them, they need the bang of the buck where they can get maximum taxes as they can. Just to give an average, if you buy a 100 rupee beer in the market, about 65 rupees goes to the government out of that 100 rupees. The balance is shared between the manufacturer, the brand, the distributors, and stuff. The other thing about beer is that beer is about 5% alcohol by volume compared to spirits, which is 40 to 50%, depending on the spirits. But your taxations are the same. So you're technically taxing 95% water at the rate of the same alcohol that you would. So I'm saying if you have 5% alcohol, if you're taxed based on alcohol content, I think the taxations can come down. The beer can become, let's say, more affordable. It can become, it's a beverage to start with. It is not a liquor. It is not a hard spirit. And I think it's to do with the government. But if I look at it from a perspective of how the consumers are responding to it, consumers are looking at not getting a high any longer. It is what I say today, it's more taste than testosterone. So earlier it was always about getting a high. If you're getting, you want the best bang from a perspective, whatever liquor you're drinking, you need to get a high. Today, I think the young, especially the millennials and the Gen Z, they're looking at sessional drinking. They don't want to get drunk. They want to have few drinks, but they want to enjoy the drinks. And I think that's where beer really plays a role. Also, statistically, India is a spiritual country when it comes to spiritual from a perspective of spirits. We drink more spirits than anywhere in the world. But all that is consumed mainly at home. So if you look at on-premise, which is where bars and restaurants come in, the spirit consumption on bars and restaurants is only 25%. But in the case of beer, 50% of the beer consumed is in an on-premise, which is really good, which means when they're coming out, they're having a great time with their friends and families. I think beer becomes the first choice. So like I said, underpenetrated, underserved, but a huge amount of headroom to grow from here.
So you refer to consumer behavior and trends. So coming to that only, the three main beer subcategories: mild, strong, and craft. So I believe India, the strong category is the highest selling, but the craft category is the fastest growing at the moment. Is that something that you agree with? And what are
Absolutely.
the trends you're picking up?
Absolutely. So India, statistically, again, is 82% of the beer sold here is strong beer. And I think it comes in mainly because of the rural push of the tier 2 and 3, where people are saying, okay, if I'm going to pay 100 rupees for a beer, I need the best high out of it. But when it comes to cities and tier 1 cities, where people are not looking at a high, they're moving towards what we call better beers. And better beers is where the craft segment comes in. So they want to drink a pint or two. They want to drink, let's say, every day, but they would not like to get drunk on it, or they will not get a high from the alcohol content. And that's where taste becomes more important. And that's where craft beer comes in. So if you want to, so it's basically you're upgrading yourself, you're premiumizing yourself in terms of what you drink. So I'm going to drink less, but I'll drink better. And that's where the consumer segment, sentiments moving towards. And we've seen the same happening in tier 2 and 3 because We are, as a cafe chain, present in 17 cities. So we really cover a kind of a pretty large demographic when it comes to India. And I think people are enjoying the crafts, and that's has the highest growth, not just because that's what the consumer wants, but also because it's a very low base. It's starting from almost zero. So if you look at even a 400% growth in craft, that's because the base is very low. So overall, if the beer industry is growing at 10 to 11% CAGR, you can have the craft beer portion growing at 400% CAGR, which obviously is because of the lower base. But I think the highest growth will come from there. Again, statistically, US, which is where the craft beer revolution really started off. In 2005, they had no microbreweries or no craft breweries. In the last 15 to 20 years, they've opened one brewery every day. That's the kind of number of breweries they've opened. There are almost 6,000 breweries out there targeting the craft beer industry. There are two macro factors for it. One is the government supports the craft beer revolution. So what they do is they allow you a lesser duty. They allow you to manufacture it closer to the supply, and it automatically helps the local community. The other thing is consumers are loving it, and that's where in US being $100 billion beer market, 30% of that is actually craft beer. So if I look at a larger country, one of the segmentation from a craft to a commercial beer, US has the highest amount. Having said that, China has become a pretty strong country for craft beers. Again, it is almost like India, where everybody is just having beer for the sake of it. Now they're moving. Italy, you'll be surprised, has 400 craft breweries now. Italy, as we all know, is more of a wine country, but has craft beer. So I think that's what we're going to mirror in India. The global aspect is going to come to India very soon.
Right. Let's come to the Beer Cafe. Very remarkably successful brand, very young kind of brand, positioning young, but educated, classy young, unlike many restaurant bars and things like that. And it's also a very social engagement led brand. Can you tell us a little bit about what drives your digital outreach strategy and the marketing on media platforms and social platforms? How do you design your communications? How do you strategize them?
So the Beer Cafe, as a brand, and any other brand in the world, has a purpose, a mission, and a vision. And the way we conceived the brand was that the purpose for our brand is be a liquid sunshine, and the two words are important to us. Liquid sunshine. Sunshine is what creates nature. Sunshine is which basically makes you happy and bright, and that's exactly what it is. So it's the liquid version of the sunshine. The other part is our vision. Obviously, our mission's limited to what we want to achieve, where we want to go, but the vision is also something that will never change. And our vision has always been to stimulate communities towards fun and responsible drinking. So the two words are very important. One is obviously the community. So we are stimulating different communities. It could be a rider community, it could be a rider community, it could be communities coming from, let's say, work from home community today. So all kinds of communities, we want to stimulate them, but everything is around fun and responsible drinking. And the two words are very important again. Fun, because beer is fun. We are dealing with a product which is really fun. It brings out happiness. It's a product which basically makes you happy in any case. But the responsible part is very important. So you would find a lot of bars and restaurants where you'll have bouncers and guards and what you have. We don't have any of that. It's a pure cafe format. The idea here is it's a bright and beautiful place. You come in, you go, you have your beers with your friends and you go. And about 1 million people come to a beer cafe, and this is obviously pre-COVID numbers. But on 1 million covers basis, we've never had any trouble. So it just means that the concept works. And that's where it comes in. Now, coming to how do we obviously engage these, the entire social side to it, is because when we start with the brand and we know what the brand is for, then everything else perpetuates from there. So everything is basically on the same pillars where the brand stands. And that's exactly what's happened. So whether it's social media, whether it's a communication through, in-store graphics or in the store installs, everything is around the fun and responsible part. But one word I want to leave with on this conversation is, I think a consumer and the guest that we call them is curious. And that curiosity is actually what's helping us. And curiosity comes in from a point that they want to learn. They want to know what's going on. They want to know why this beer is good. And I think that curiosity is helping us out. And because we are an aggregator of beers, literally, we put so many beers under one roof. We're not just selling 4 or 5 beers. We sell 40 to 50 beers. And any beer that comes to India, we take it up and we put it into our cafes, depending on the laws of that state. But what we've realized is that consumers are very curious. And that really helps our mission. our vision from a perspective that it really brings out the best out of us as well as our guests.
You're also leveraging many of these insights and learnings into your private label development. Tell us a little bit about what the Beer Cafe private label is all about and what's the strategy going forward.
So I'm a retailer turned restaurateur. So you obviously can't take the retail out of me. The restaurateur bit happened by I would say, it was destiny that I had to be in the restaurant business, technically in the restaurant business. But the way the Beer Cafe functions is almost like a retailer. We are not manufacturing anything. We get beers from, across the world, and we basically have to chill and serve. So we're a service industry, but we're basically technically a product industry, which is serving something which is already produced. But, there's a huge amount of supply chain, and that beer also expires. So we're also dealing with time bomb where every day the shelf life goes down. And especially in the COVID, we've seen how crazy it becomes. If you have larger stock, like in the business of apparel where I came from, stock outs, or let's say stock would happen because of fashion and because of weather, but you had a chance to sell them in an outlet. You could go to a factory outlet or like a after sale or whatever. In beer, if you have a shelf life gone, you just can't say, okay, I'll give this beer 50% off, drink it. By law, I can't give you that beer because it's already expired. So we're really dealing with a perishable product, which is tough. But as a retailer mindset, that's exactly what we do. Our supply chains are extremely careful. We do just in time. We do turns of 10 to 12. But one of the things that comes in is how do we get a better gross margins? And better gross margins as a retailer or a chain of retail, as you know, comes in from your own private label. It's a given in, whether it's beauty, whether it's even the salon business, whether it's a fashion business. I think private label automatically brings in that extra margin. Also, it tells you that if there is a supply chain disruption, it's your own supply chain. You're not dependent on somebody else to give you that product. So I think that makes it, and we've been selling that for the last 1.5 years. We don't sell it to anybody else. It's our own private label. It's not called the Beer Cafe. It's called Indie. We've given it a name, and it's got 3 or 4 variants, and people like it because they get a better value. We also place it well, but consumers don't know it's from us. From a perspective, no guest ever knows that this is a Beer Cafe's private label. They don't know this. It's just that we've been able to get better margins for sure from a business perspective, but we also have been always at continuity because we control that supply chain. We make sure that's always in stock. And the other part about a private label is because we are here and sense what's going on. We have the closest ears to the market because the consumers are, being served every day. So I think we know what to serve. And I think that allows a private label to be a little ahead of time than anybody else. If a big company goes and decides on a flavor of a beer, they'll have to do a market survey. They'll probably get some fancy agency to look at it. But we don't do that. For us, it's the real consumer out there. We have more data than anybody can have in the beer market. I can challenge that. I think we have the maximum data when it comes to the beer market in India.
How much does the private label currently contribute to your total sales?
So it's not the largest because our beer business, you'll be surprised, we sell tap beer, and then after that, our second component is food. Because India is a foodie place, so we end up selling more food than bottled beer. But if I look at the beer component between bottled beer and draft beer, it's almost 50% of our business comes from that. Out of that, about 10% is coming. So I would say at the company level, 5%, but on a beer segment basis, 10% is coming from private label, which is quite healthy because it gives us better margins.
Right. Over the past year, there have been massive changes in consumer behavior in all categories, including food service. What is your outlook on the online food service model? And do you believe going forward, the conventional restaurant business model needs some tweaking?
So I'll answer your second question first because that's more closer to me, and then I'll come to the delivery part or the online part. One, I can tell you on the restaurants. So restaurants are a perpetual business. For centuries and decades and whatever you can go back in time, so restaurants have always been there. So it is something that will never go out. It's something that will have the blips, it'll have the the highs and lows. But I would just give you an example of the last big natural pandemic, or I would say not pandemic or natural calamity that happened was in New Orleans, in the United States, where the Katrina hurricane ousted everything in 2005. So there was nothing left. And what happened was that these restaurants were gutted. Like in our case, we were shut down due to the pandemic, but we were not gutted. Our restaurants did not disappear. They're still there physically. You just had to reopen them. There it got gutted, and there were about 900 restaurants. Today, after all that has happened, there are about 1,200 of them. So if you look at Spanish flu, you look at the World War I, to any big event in this country, in the world, the restaurants have survived. So I think the survival instinct remains. Now, the question remains, the restaurant will survive or the industry survive, but who will be running it is the question. So it's obviously, will that business be run by the same businessman? That's obviously a question to be answered. That depends on the business model that you have, or how much deep pockets, or how much perseverance you have. But yes, but what's happened due to this recent COVID, and I hope this is the first and the last in our life cycle that we will, or our generation, we will see something so disruptive. But I think what it has done is equalize everybody. So I call it an equal opportunity phenomenon. And I'm actually, it's actually utilized all of us. So now there's a level playing field. And I can, I actually, I won't say I'm happy with the pandemic, but I think pandemic's adversity has given me an opportunity and something that we really believe, I believed in. So I'll give you certain things that, I believe in and actually it's come true. So one is that everybody says, innovate, innovate, innovate. Innovation is important. But I think it's proven concept today that you don't want a new one, you want a safer one. So it's what's actually proven is that I don't have to be very edgy. If I have replicated my brand into multiple outlets, and that's exactly what it is. Now, if I look at QSRs, if I look at any QSRs in India, which has done very well, whether it's Domino's as a brand or McDonald's or now Burger King, and now even, places like Barbecue Nation, and, now Devyani is just listed yesterday, which meaning they've gone to the browsers yesterday. And if you look at all that, what is happening? People are going towards safer brands. If you go on the highway today, you will see people stopping at the safer brands rather than trying a new innovation. So I think that's kind of proven it for us. The other part that's also happened is that, we were always thinking that the influencers are, they are the ones who are creating the brands. And that's become very common. If I'm on social media, everything looks booming on social media. But that's not the true fact. Sometimes it's not important for the influencers, the real users. The influencers are just a bubble in its own way. So all that has happened. So when people thought things are booming, they were actually not booming. Few places were booming, not every place was booming. So I think that equalization has been very good to us. But the most important thing is that brands which are stable, brands which have a longer tail, have actually going to be, they will go through the process, what I call survive, revive, and thrive. And I think the survival has already happened. We're already in the revival stage, and I can tell you we're really good in the revival stage. And the thrive will happen. The cycle of, these waves will come and go, and after a while, the virus will get eradicated, and we will be back to, the thriving position. But what has come out of this pandemic is that people are eating, delivering, or let's say ordering in more than ever. And now that's because of safety. I don't want to go to a place dine in. It's also because I want a family event. I have no place to go. I'm not traveling. I'm saving money. And the best part is that, the easiest gratification you get is by eating with your family. Eating out was always a family event, and today that's becoming as an ordering in. So I think the delivery business has boomed, not just because of that, but this is an emotional question here, that families are eating together. Okay, let's take a Sunday off, and we can't go out in a car or go to a picnic. Let's make the picnic at home. Let's give everybody a break, and let's basically bring in food. Apart from that, there's obviously the gig people, or people who are basically working from home alone. They don't have a big family. They're working all the time, and they're also ordering it. So I think it's a double impact where, food from convenience is also emotion. So there's a convenience side and there's an emotion side. I have never personally, as a family, ever ordered so much food that I've done in the last 12 months. It's more emotional than anything else.
Right. You talked about online deliveries. My next question is actually about the food aggregators. And there's a lot of blowback from restaurant owners on how the aggregation model itself works. That they're not actually expanding the restaurants with their business, but and also the hefty commissions, and there is no access to data that you really need to understand customers. What is your view on some restaurants now saying that we should look at direct to consumer models from restaurant to customer directly without aggregators or third parties? And even NRI is in fact advocating some of this. What is your view on this?
So look, first of all, as a market, it is online delivery, or let's say it's e-commerce of food. When you look at that from a consumer, he doesn't really care. Consumers sitting at my house right now, they don't care how they get the food, whether they get through an aggregator, whether they get directly from the store. It doesn't matter. They want convenience. They want the best value. Whoever gives them that convenience and value is what will win. It's as simple as that. From a restaurant point of view or a merchant point of view, the aggregators have created a marketplace. It wasn't there. If, let's say, there were no aggregators, we would not have a thriving food delivery business as much as we have. I think a single restaurateur cannot ever replicate what a convenience that an aggregator does. So it'll always be a love and hate. It'll always be a mix and match from a perspective of you can never ever substitute an aggregator, but you will always be able to have an alternative to it. And the D2C or the order direct is the alternative. That's for established brands and even new brands who want to really, be direct to the consumers. That's what's happening. It's also happening in the retail business, or let's say FMCG business. Platforms like Shopify have been able to do that, and that's what's happening today. So there are platforms like DotPay, platforms like Thrive, which are not aggregators, but they're platforms which are allowing you to go direct to the consumer. Now it gives you two things. One, it gives you data, which is what we've been asking. So if the aggregators are sharing data, because at the end of the day, it's my consumer. I'm getting paid by the consumer. You are a commission broker, or you are a person who's in the middle. You're a middleman taking the brokerage or the commission, whatever you want to call it. But how can you steal the data from me when the consumer is mine, the guest is mine? He's ordering my product. I'm delivering the product through a rider, which is also a third-party rider. But why is the data not coming to me? So that's the biggest pet peeve. The other one is obviously commercial in nature. If the commissions go up or the brokerage go up from 15, 20, 25%, it's not going to make sense. One good news that's happened in this pandemic is that consumers are not chasing discounts. So the whole deep discount structure is gone. You will have these flashes saying don't eat in July and 50% off. Those are all flashes with caps. So actually, technically, as a consumer, doesn't get so much of a benefit. But one, the deep discounting has gone. The other good news is that consumers are now paying for packaging as well as delivery. So for them, it's like if I come into a restaurant and eat, they're not paying for delivery, they're not paying for packaging because they're eating in a tableware that's already set up. But today, when you're being delivered food, consumers have started paying for packaging delivery, and I think that's maturity of the consumer. Because earlier, delivery meant cheap for the consumer also, because he would always get a discount. So your biryani had become 50 rupees. Now that's absolutely absurd because you can't even make a biryani for 50 rupees. So if consumers were buying biryani for 50 rupees, something will break, and that's what happened. So I think it's a matter of what I call coexistence, and that's what's happening right now. There will be order directs. There will be brands which will thrive in order directs because they are so powerful. There will be people like cloud kitchens. They cannot go order direct so openly, so they need the aggregator, and it will be a love and hate. It will always continue. But the business of delivery as a portion of the entire business will only increase rapidly. So at this point in time, it's not a big business. You'll be surprised the business of delivery in India is for the aggregators only $4 billion out of $60 billion. It's only $4 billion, and a total delivery business is about $5.5 billion because people still have deliveries directly. There are still deliveries happening across restaurants over phones the way it used to be. But this business is going to become $8 to $9 billion. And that is why you had a successful listing and one of the most beautiful listings that you ever saw from a recent aggregator, because that's what the market is realizing. This market will only go up. So the $60 billion food service business in India, which is 4,20,000 crores, is going to become 100 billion. It's going to become 7 lakh crores very soon, once we've gone through the cycle of pandemic. But in that, the component of delivery will be far bigger because it's starting at a very low base. So it's going to become very big. And that's what you will see. So it'll never eat into the dining in business because restaurants will continue to be dining in. That's where people love. It's like I said, the emotions, going together, sitting together, enjoying your meal together. But the delivery is going to get very big in India. I can assure it's going to really, really go. And the highest CAGR will come from delivery.
Right. Sadly, the restaurant business, the F&B business also has probably one of the highest mortality rates of any industry in India. I mean, I think about 70 to 80% of all new restaurants shut down within a year or 18 months. Why do you think that is? Is it because the aspirants who enter the field are there for the wrong reasons? They think opening a restaurant is more like a lifestyle statement than a really serious business operation?
Oh, so it's you answered my question actually because that's exactly what it is. First of all, the entry barrier is very low to be in the restaurant business. You think, okay, I'm going to make the dal makhni for 40, 50 rupees and I'll sell it for 300 rupees. So you do your back of envelope maths and you say, wow, I'm going to make so much profit. Please understand that's not profit. That's a margin. After that, you have fixed cost, you have variable cost, and those expenses have to be taken care of. So a lot of people think, wow, this is going to be great profitable. It doesn't start with that. But because the entry barriers are very low in this business, and the entry barrier meaning you can set up a restaurant from as little as 20 lakh rupees, all the way to 3, 4, 5 crores, whatever your size could be. But because it's such a small amount to invest, a lot of people do it from the lifestyle perspective. Okay, I'm going to do this. And everybody emotionally is a foodie. We all are foodies, our own nature. Whether we like to eat, whether we like to cook, food is an essential part. Roti, kapda, makan, these three things are absolutely important for, living. And I think that gives you, everybody say, oh, I want to. So in my case, every friend of mine or everybody wants to be a bartender. Everybody says, I want to be a bartender. It's like a given and I want to be a bartender. It's such a big, let's say, you're imagining yourself to be a bartender and all that, emotions come in. Same thing with being a restaurateur, where people look at it from a perspective that, okay, I'm going to make a restaurant and I will really work hard and I'll do this. But I think certain things go wrong. One, they're not from this field. They do it as something called a side business, which is something I'm absolutely against, because the two words in itself don't coincide. How can you have a business called a side business? Business is to be business. You can't be a side business, and that's where people go wrong. You can be an investor, no issues, as Nupur is an editor, she understands journalism, she understands, but she can be an investor. That's okay. But if you start making your own restaurant, something will go away. Between the two, things that you do, you will fail in one of them. And I think that's what happens. And so most of the dreams come shattering, and there are a lot of failures, and that's one of the reasons you have the mortality rate being the highest in any industry. Obviously, pandemic has just cemented it even further, because pandemic, I can tell you, even the best of people have actually shut shop and won't be able to open again. But you have to take business seriously. That's my thought process has always been that business has to be taken seriously. You have to take business. This cannot be a side business.
Okay, so coming from that, let's have you do some mentoring here. So you've referred to something called the RSS effect, being instrumental in creating a profitable food service operation. So tell us a little bit more about that, and what would you advise these entrants who are perhaps not equipped with the right either mindset, passion, or knowledge to successfully operate a restaurant business?
So to start with, just as a disclaimer, the RSS word is a very common word. It's used for certain things politically, but for me, it's easier to remember. But the RSS stands for your business. In our business of the restaurant or food service needs to be replicable. So that's very important. If you're going to do a chain business, I'm saying you do one good store, just have a single pizza store, you can do fantastic business. Michelin star chefs actually do fantastic businesses in their own. That's given in. You can have family business. Pandara Road is nothing but a family business. One of the most thriving, restaurants in the country. And they've been there and they'll be there forever. I think 5, 10, 50, whatever generation we see for food, they will be there. But when it comes to a product like mine, and this I'm talking about as an entrepreneur, somebody who got into this new, I'm a retailer turned restaurateur, actually a professional turned entrepreneur too. For me, I had to do things in a very different way. The good news was I saw everything, a very common word called out of box, but actually it was out of the box, where I was seeing everything from not within the box. I'm not a hospitality person. I've never been to a kitchen. I don't understand food. So I was like seeing it everything from a very different aspect. And those lenses gave me a bit of I would say a differentiator. And one of the things I came up with that your business has to be replicable. Your business should be able to replicate, then only you'll be able to create a big enterprise and a sustainable and a perpetual one. The second word is basically called scalable. Apart from being replicable, it has to be scalable. Can it scale with low capex? Can it be asset right? Can it be asset light? You don't need too much money to scale up. Can you do big turns? Like in our case, our asset to turn, which I mean, what is your annual turnover to the amount of money you put is 4 times. 3.5 to 4 times. That's unbelievable. So if I put 1 rupees, I do a turnover of 3.5 to 4 rupees every year on year, and then you have profits coming out of that. So I think that is an important part for being scalable. The third is extremely important, which is where replicability, scalability can come in from many businesses, but sustainability is extremely important. And that sustainability, I'm not talking about sustainability from a point of nature, and I'm not talking about go green sustainability. I'm talking sustainability as a business. Can your business sustain? Like I'll give you this example. Not blowing my own trumpet, but 2017, we went through hell when the government of the Supreme Court decided to ban the highways for liquor service. So it was for retail, it was for truckists, it was for motorists. So they don't stand, drink, and they drive, right? Drive their trucks. But it actually impacted everybody because even the best of hotels, the Oberois, the Tridents, everybody was closed down for business. It was for 6 months we were closed down, completely almost. So we went through that. And then came in 2020 where, we were closed for again 6 months. And then we were reopened in September last year, again after 6 months of complete closure. And we are not into e-commerce, so we didn't have another pivot. So like today you are into print business, but you can create a digital side to it. We're doing a Zoom call. Earlier we would have never done a Zoom, but I think how can I serve you beer through the computer? How can I? And then the government of India doesn't allow e-commerce of alcohol, so I can't even get the beer to you. I was shut for 6 months, and then we reopened, and then we were shut again due to the wave two. And I know there's a wave three coming up. That's where the word sustainable come in. Can you smile after all this? Can you go through this grind without money? I have zero support from any shareholders at this stage. They kind of gave up on this. They said, you know what, you're on your own, and that's where it came in, because a lot of companies are well funded. They have so much of runway. They'll have 20 months, 30 months of runway. I didn't have any. So we are completely self-sustained right now, and that's proven that if you are the grit, you will be able to go through it. And that's why I say your business model has to start with that. You should be able to control your expenses. Can you cut your costs? Can you do things? Because if things go wrong, you have to change your course. So the way I look at it is very simple. That when you're sailing, for example, it's not just sailing from a perspective that you're sailing against the wind or with the wind. You have to keep changing your course. It's the whole idea is to keep changing the course. You have to make the maximum out of whatever the situations are. And a lot of people give me the same story saying, no, but we're in the same boat. We're in the same boat. We all go through that. Please understand, pandemic doesn't mean we're in the same boat. We're in the same storm. The boats are different. There is Parle Ji who's made more money than anybody has ever made, because the storm helped that boat. But some boats have sunk. So it's not that we're in the same boat. We're in the same storm.
So really, it's also about financial management, working capital, cash flows in good times, right? So
Yeah.
how would you sum that up? What is the equation that in good times to maintain financial discipline?
In fact, something which was a positive for our industry, it's called negative working capital. Now, what does negative working capital mean? Is that restaurants were considered as a negative working capital. It was very, commonly said that, when you go to KFC and you order and you pay the money, when the money comes in the hand of the till, then the chicken gets fried. No, that's an unbelievable model, which means, you've taken the money front and then you're doing your product. So that's called negative working capital. In our case, for example, it's a direct to consumer business. You come in and you swipe your card or you pay the money in a restaurant, but I am paying things later. My salaries are later, my rents are later. I have credit terms from my vendors and all that stuff. That's called negative working capital. It was seen as a boon for this industry. Actually became a bane. It actually became a bane because we got so used to the negative working capital that when things went south, which is what happened, we were left with so much of a negative working capital actually became our payable, because now we don't have any money coming in. So there was a survey done. Not India doesn't have too much data because kind of fragmented. But in the US, they did a segment, and you'll be surprised with that report. They took this out across all retail, restaurant business, this business, that business, whatever. The lowest amount of cash in hand was in the restaurant sector. Total amount of restaurants only had 43 days of cash because they work on negative capital. Now, the moment that pipe stopped, they were just flooded. In my case, I can tell you, I lost about 2 crores worth of beer because beer expired. Now, when I lose the beer, I have to pay somebody. It was a credit-based beer. I would sell and make the money and then give the beer money, meaning the beer manufacturer money. Now I'm stuck with beer, which had to go down. Government didn't support me at all. Now that I have to pay that 2 crore rupees. How do I get that 2 crore rupees? So it's actually, it's been extremely tough. But I think the partners that we have, and I'll give you my experience, has been very good. They see you as a continuous business. They see you as a business which will continue. Good days will come. I went and negotiated myself. So I tell you, I've last 1.5 years, I've been more of a chartered accountant than any other role. I've done an HR role where I've, so many employees, we have to kind of work with them, make sure that, they're still happy and they can still go through it and they can rejoin us. It's been one lesson that I would never forget. These last 12 months have been unbelievable.
Yes. So what has been the biggest leadership lessons for you coming out of this?
The simple word is grit. You have to persevere. You will continue facing these headwinds. The storm will come and go, but you have to stand tall. If you can stand tall and you're the last man standing there, I think you will survive. And it's been the most survival instinct that one could have gone through, because everything is against you. There's been no support really from any authorities. Like in the US, the president himself is going out and eating and writing checks. In the UK, there were coupons given so you can go to the restaurant. Here, the restaurant unfortunately is a service industry, and I think they take it very seriously. You only serve. You're here to only serve. So I think the service industry literally takes a back. The other thing about the government, and we met with everybody there, is that they don't see it. They see it as a luxury. We like this lost child. We could be the best employer. We could be anything, but when it comes to it, they don't even care. Can you imagine? They just added some new ministries as an example. We have now 54 or 55 ministries in India. We don't even have one for restaurant. It's 2% of India's GDP, and we don't have it. And we have ministries like Earth Sciences, Ayush, clean water, all Jal Shakti. All these are ministries, okay? But we have no ministries for the restaurant. We don't even know where to go. We don't know where we sit in. And that's what it is. So it was well said that somebody said this, that retail has been the lost child, and the same thing happened with us. Retail restaurateurs have been the lost child in this pandemic. Nobody cared for us.
Yes. Okay. The final question.
Yeah.
Tell us 3 very little known facts about beer.
Oh, little known. Okay. Beer was discovered by a woman. First, it's from the Sumer dynasty. That's what happened. And people don't know this. The second is the oldest recipe in the world. Oldest recipe in the world is still beer. The third one is interesting from a perspective of consumption. The world's largest per capita consumption of beer is not England or not US or not China, is Czech Republic. And Czech Republic, out of 12 months, 6 to 7 months is snow laden, it's like snow. So when the beer gets delivered in those big tanks, they have heating tanks. So they're reversed. So like today in India, if I have to deliver beer to your home, I'll have cooling tanks to bring beer to you. They have heating tanks because it's minus 10 or 20, whatever degrees. So the beer has to come at 4 degrees. So imagine you have to heat the beer to bring the beer to you. So it's unbelievable. And Czech Republic has the highest per capita. One person in Czech Republic drinks 175 liters per year, just to give you 2 liters of India. So 2 liters in India, 175 liters in Czech Republic.
Wow, that's an astonishing fact. Mr. Singh, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. Yes. And I hope to see you very soon. I don't know where, but we definitely will see you very soon. I think we're just going to go through this uncertainty, maybe the wave 3, but we'll be back to having physical conventions and stuff.
Absolutely. All the best to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.